This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Today's guest is a good friend and someone who I think you'll love to hear from. He's an impressive founder, entrepreneur, and optometrist. He has combined his clinical expertise with a strong commitment to service while participating in international mission trips, offering exams for Special Olympic athletes, and supporting local organizations such as Lions Club. He specializes in treating eye diseases, advanced vision correction, and co-managing ocular surgeries. He also founded Sherpa Consulting to help coach dynamic teams to reach their full potential. He's owner and optometrist at Envision Eyecare. Please welcome Dr. Larry Golson. Larry, welcome.
Thank you, Ankit. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited about this conversation. You and I have known each other for a while, and you're really a dynamic individual. So I think the audience is going to get a lot of value from this conversation. So what was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
You know, early on, I spoke with a good friend of mine. Well, he became a good friend over time, but I had just opened my practice, and it was 2008, and I was thinking about hiring a consulting firm that kind of helps practices soup to nuts, A to Z, with everything from like exam forms. This is before the digital age, so I'm dating myself a little bit. But they help with, from scripting and marketing and everything that practice would need. And I was talking to my friend who's in the industry for Eyecare, and I said, do you think I should hire these people? And he said, well, if you want a cookie cutter type of practice, then yes. But if you want to be unique and different, then it would make sense to find the best person for marketing, find the best person for communications, and find the best person for finance, and surround yourself with a team of people that are experts in their own individual field, and think about them as like a board of directors for you. Since we're a small business and we were a cold start, we certainly weren't big enough for any type of board, but having that advice and thinking about it from a standpoint of who can I call on, who can I ask that's smarter than I am, more experienced, and or could give me information that would help along the way. And if I can enter this into with a beginner's mind, which is an Eastern concept with, I've never done this before, which I hadn't in this case, but how can I gain information from others that would be helpful? And that's really what started me on my path towards what I built up to this point.
Yeah. And so tell me a little bit more about that beginner's mind. Like, how'd that come into play? Can you give me an example of maybe how it manifested in your growth cycle, how it made an impact for you?
Yeah, sure. So the idea of beginner's mind, to expand on that a little bit, is to approach anything that we might do from, hey, I'm new at this. I don't know what I'm doing. Let me be as humble as I can and seek advice from others. And so often, even when I consult with Sherpa Consulting, I talk to other doctors that run practices, and they have these preconceived notions, or they have these ideas that, hey, I know what I'm doing. I'm a doctor. And I know I'm doing it right. And they might be doing stuff that's fine or great or not. And either way, the idea of beginner's mind is that, you approach it as, hey, I don't know everything. I don't necessarily have all the answers. The answers are out there. So let me be open-minded to receive them.
Gotcha. Okay. Can you give me a specific example in your business, how it affected, like a concrete example?
Yeah, for sure. So I had been practicing optometry for 4 years before I opened my practice, and I thought I did a pretty darn good job communicating to patients. And when I opened my practice, I had all day, and I didn't have many patients on the schedule. So I would spend like over an hour giving an exam, trying to be as thorough as I could, explain every detail. And at some point I had a dialogue coach sit in with me, and he was taking notes. And throughout that hour-long exam, he came out with pages of notes. And the first thing he said to me was, wow, did you see how overwhelmed your patient was? And I was like, no, I didn't. What are you talking about? And he's like, well, you gave them so much information that by the time that they left your exam room, they really weren't able to make any decisions and were kind of seemed like they were overwhelmed and confused. And so I started watching my patients from that point forward, and I realized he was onto something, that I really did need to make my dialogue more succinct, more impactful. And that's when I started really bringing my time down. Even though I still didn't have as many patients, I was just more impactful with each patient. And so being open to that critique. Now, this dialogue coach, he does a lot of work in the field and works with a lot of doctors and opticals. And he basically gave me some really good advice on how I could change the way I spoke to patients. And what I realized later is that we were never really taught how to speak to patients. We were taught how to do a refraction, how to look at the optic nerve, so on and so forth. But we never really were taught how to actually use our words to find impact. And the value of our communication, I learned, was that the value of it is measured at the patient's ear, not at the doctor's voice or what words we use. So we really need to think about and dissect what we say, how we say it, and also watching our patient and their reactions to what we're saying. So I actually started recording myself in the exam room, and that was very illuminating because I realized that I really needed to work a lot on my dialogue.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about that. How did they make patients feel uncomfortable, or how did that go?
You know, when I started working on the dialogue, I felt uncomfortable because I was saying things that in a way that wasn't used to, it wasn't my habit. Because we all have like our go-to default scripts that we use when we start explaining something like glaucoma or something like nearsightedness. And so I felt a little bit like a fish out of water. I'm sure the patient registered that. I would guess they did
Mhm.
initially, but eventually those kind of neural pathways started to form, and I just became way more fluent with it and natural. And when I coach other doctors on their dialogue, because I do this now, I sit in on doctors and listen to the way they talk to patients and give them advice or consultation on how to maybe say it or consider it differently. Um, what ends up happening is it does feel very awkward for anybody at first. But if you think about the best Broadway actors or the best athletes, Olympic athletes, for instance, they all practice, right? They all practice. And do doctors ever practice how they talk to patients? Normally we don't. We just go into the exam room, we give an exam, we don't really think about it. So, it really led to this whole idea of me thinking about it, trying it out, being awkward at first, but then making it more natural. And now I can just kind of like, say it like it's me talking to you right now. And it just becomes natural.
Gotcha. I like that. So as you were growing, you were learning these new skills. What was something that you ran into that you didn't expect as you were growing your businesses?
I never really realized that when I opened, I had it was me and two team members, and they kind of did a little bit of everything. And as we grew, once we got to about 8 team members, I started to realize that my leadership skills were insufficient. And I guess I never really understood the word leadership. It's interesting as we go through life, we understand words in a different meaning as we have different experiences. And so, what I started to understand is that my ability to manage, lead, to be the boss was insufficient, and I really needed to learn that as another skill. So, just like I was saying, I kind of learned how to speak to patients at some point. I also learned better ways to communicate as a leader to my team. And so, what I didn't really, to answer your direct question, once we got to about 8 people, that's when little subcultures started to form because there were enough people to where these 2 people peeled off and had their own little conversations, and these 3 people over here kind of saw things the same way. And so, I started to realize that, okay, I needed to get better at how I can be a leader to these people to offer the right amount of support and also the right amount of challenge in the right situation at the right time so that we held a high positive culture. We had a really good culture when we started, and it was easier when we were smaller, but as we grew, it got really hard to have a good culture unless we really nurtured it. And so
Gotcha.
I would nurture that. Yeah.
That's actually really good insight. I like that because you don't think about, okay, all these subcultures forming. What did what what were some of the problems you saw? Like looking back on it, like, oh, I wish I would have picked up sooner. What are some things that you noticed now looking back? Like, yeah, this was time or signs of the culture breaking.
Yeah, so I would say that a couple of things come to mind right away on Kid. One is that I when there was an interpersonal issue with two of my team members, I was managing a lot of that, even though I had an office manager. And I would pull one person into the room and I would get their story. Then I'd pull the other person into the room and I'd get a different story. And I really didn't know what to believe. And so one thing that I learned was if there's an interpersonal conflict is to pull both people in the room and to really, kind of give it framing, give the conversation a frame to say, y'all, we're all in this together. We all have the same objective, which is to have a cohesive, strong, positive team. Understand there's a concern. Let's talk about it. I'm here to help. And how can we help? And so from that point forward, I never, got one story and they got a different story. It was always like, all right, there's an issue. Great. We're all going to talk about it. And it's going to be uncomfortable. And that's part of it. And we'll get through it. And so that was one thing I learned. And another thing was I had a manager initially that was incredible. It's funny. I was talking about this morning with a client of mine. She was incredible at the details and the administrative aspect of her role as office manager. What she wasn't as good with, Ankit, was handling these type of issues with people. She really wanted everybody to like her, and that spells disaster for a manager because we have to have hard conversations and we have to deal with conflict. And this individual, at one point we were just going through it with some people on our team, and she threw her hands up in the air and she said, "Maybe I just shouldn't be managing people." And had I had the insights that I have now, we would have talked about that and said, well, let's talk about that. And let me ask some questions to you. And we can decide, I definitely want you on this team. I just don't know if this is the best seat for you. So let's figure that out together.
Did that person stay with you, or it just didn't work out? I guess.
Yeah, I didn't have the leadership bandwidth or skills to be able to understand how to manage that at the time. And eventually our team got to a size where it just was not the right fit and she ended up resigning.
Gotcha. And so what I'm hearing is like you saw more conflict, and conflict kept arising. So there was like interpersonal conflict that kept happening, and it happened more often as you started getting these subcultures.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not only the subcultures and interpersonal, it's also, well, I want to get a raise. How do we handle that conversation? Hey, we need more medical assistance. How do we decide if we need more medical assistance? And so it's a whole array of concerns that arose that we just weren't really skilled enough to handle. And so, one of the things going back to the initial part of our conversation surrounding ourselves with experts was I started to look for other ways to learn. I started reading more books about managing people and managing a business. I hired consultants. I've hired a lot of consultants in my career, and it just learn how to do these things. And gosh, I wouldn't be able to help others if I hadn't have done that. And I mean, it helps me in my own practice still to this day, and I get to have the privilege to help others as well.
Yeah. So not you have the Sherpa consulting, which helps other optometrists and other businesses, similar challenges with scale and growth. And do you still tell us about? Are you still practicing at Envision as much, or is that more of a hands-off thing for you? Where do you spend most of your time now?
Well, at this moment of this recording, I just moved into a new office, and we moved from about 4,000 square feet to about 6,000 square feet. And I'm like outside my window right now, watching them landscape our yard outside, which is really a cool time for us. So I've been very involved. Been very involved with the day to day. I have a doctor on vacation this week, so I am seeing patients. But if we'd had this call maybe 3 months earlier or 3 months later, I really don't see that many patients, if at all. Maybe just to keep my skills up. And at this point, my next kind of phase is to allow my general manager to run the practice and for me to step back and be a true owner. And what that means is I'm really not involved in hiring decisions or get any type of HR. I'm simply collecting information. I'm helping when she needs support from me,
Mhm.
my general manager, and she is really running the show. And so my goal is to really spend more time in my personal life and to free up more time to do Sherpa consulting, which I just really love. I'm very passionate about helping other private practice owners succeed because, gosh, it's hard these days. You can't just be like, hang your shingle and expect to be successful. You really have to know business. You have to know how to lead. You have to know how to do the financial aspects to remain profitable.
So let's talk about that a little bit. A lot of folks are having challenges with managing reimbursements, being stagnant or going down, and staffing. Um, can you talk about those particular two challenges and how, one, you face them and deal with them, and two, what are you seeing other folks do? Because you work with a lot of practices.
Yeah, sure. So as far as the reimbursement aspect, I have a lot of practices that do it in house, and they have a person that bills and all of their medical and vision plans. I have clients that outsource that to a third party, and so there's really those are the two models that I'm most familiar with. And then there's a hybrid model where they have somebody on the team who does know how to do it, who kind of watches and manages the third party who might bill for that practice and might step in on certain claims. And that's the model that we're going to because we've done both actually. And at this point, we're going to outsource it to a third party, but we're going to have somebody watch it because it becomes such an important aspect of cash flow. And if certain claims don't get billed or rebilled in time, they get lost. And so we're end up doing some of our work for free, basically. So that's one aspect is to, really think about setting up a system to review your accounts receivable and make sure that we are billing, regardless of which way we're billing, that it's timely and that we're getting reimbursed and there's not too much falling into that 120 plus day category. As far as staffing, I would say that, gosh, the number one challenge that I hear over and over, and I can say in our practice as well, is staffing. And it's a really hard thing to get people who are passionate about what the purpose and the values are of a practice and to also live that out day to day in their behaviors and to also try and balance things like the payroll expense with revenue and how much we are spending on our teams. And so, one of the ways that we have evolved in our practice, and I try and help other practices as well, is this idea of hiring slowly and firing quickly. And the simple fact of the matter is we want the highest and best for anybody that works in our team. And if someone is falling in their performance, then we're going to do what we can to help them succeed. And sometimes helping them succeed means to invite them to go work elsewhere, which is really hard thing to say. But, if they're not succeeding and doing their highest and best work in our practices, and we want them to go find another place that they can do that. And so it kind of reframed it in our minds because we hate the idea of letting somebody go or having somebody resign. But at the same time, we've really learned how to help people find if this is the right fit and how to succeed. Even a lot of times they're in the wrong seat on our bus and we put them in a different place and then they start to thrive. And so that's one aspect of it is really learning how to have those, a lot of people are like resistant to conflict. And in my opinion, conflict is 100% necessary to have a healthy culture. There's a way to do it in a positive way, and there's a way to do it in a not so positive way, but it needs to happen. Hard conversations need to happen. And so,
So are you fully staffed right now? Or is that,
I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and it's getting more and more expensive. We had a hurricane last year, and it's an expensive place to live. And so we have had a couple of team members leave recently to live closer to their families in the eastern part of North Carolina. And so we have a couple of positions that we're filling right now. And that being said, our core team is super strong and everybody that's here wants to be here and has earned a place on this team and continue to each day. And so when we do have a situation like we have right now where we're looking for more team members, we do put ads on Indeed. We also look to our team to say, hey, if y'all know of anybody that would be a great team member, the idea I could birds of a feather flock together. Good team members know other people that might be good team members. And so we get our best team members from referrals from our existing team. And they're looking at our patients day by day and saying, that 3 o'clock patient was pretty awesome. I wonder if they'd make a good optician. And so we incentivize our team heavily. I think we offer them like $500 if they refer somebody to the practice that we end up hiring. And if that same person is still on our team 6 months later, then they get that team member that referred gets another $1,000. So they can make, a good bonus if they refer somebody. And it's so expensive to deal with turnover. It's been said it costing anywhere from half to a whole year's compensation to lose a team member. So if you're paying an optician, let's say $50,000, and you lose that person, it'll cost the practice another $50,000 to replace them. So we're really, kind of lasered in on hiring slowly, hiring the right people, and then working on their development over time.
Okay, excellent. So what do you do with the short staff times? Like you're too short, like you just say, like, hey guys, we're just going to work overtime and kind of work through stuff. Like how do you manage that? Because it's a real reality a lot of offices are facing right now.
Yeah, most practices I work with are understaffed,
Yeah.
and I always encourage people to overstaff and also build their bench, because when we do need to call upon somebody to hire someone, it's nice to have several people that we've met that we are interested in. And as far as what we do at times like these is, number one, we accept the fact that we're going to not be as profitable or not drive revenue during those times. We just know that's going to happen and accept it. And then number two, sometimes we reduce our schedule to accommodate the fact that if we have a low amount of opticians, we're just not going to be able to see that many patients. Or the doctors know to tell the patients, hey, glad you're here today. We're going to need to reschedule you to come back to look at glasses. And we work to reschedule the patients. And so we do internally change the way that we operate to accommodate a lower staff, because working overtime and overworking our existing team is going to cause burnout over time, and it's going to damage the culture. And so there's a balancing act. And I think as leaders, we all have to think about discernment, and when can we push the gas, and when do we need to coast, and when do we need to push the brakes.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think those are the realities of the situation sometimes. And it's interesting. You say you encourage folks to overhire, even in like the thinner margin type Medicaid type practices. If you work with any of those folks, I know that can be a little bit more difficult, because it's like, hey, you got to see patients, you got to execute. Overstaffing though, they might lose some of the margin that they're doing, especially if they don't have the volume. Is it kind of generally good across the board from what you see, or like, yeah, tell us about some insights around that.
Yeah, I know some Medicaid practices that are more profitable than mine, and it's a different model. And that's a really good point that you bring up, is that, this is not a cookie cutter solution for everyone, because sometimes there are thinner margins and the practice can't afford to overstaff. And so it really depends on what the financials look like at a given time and what the cash reserves look like at a given time. For my Medicaid practices, it's all about throughput, and
Sure.
my practice is very different than that. It's more of a mid to high end practice, very high touch, very nice optical and everything. Medicaid practice, I know a practice in Louisiana, and he is so good at getting people through a system. He takes great care of his patients, but man, they're just like fast, and so they're a totally different model than mine, but it works and it's profitable. So, um, you know overstaffing for him works because he knows that he delegates a lot to his technicians and medical
Yeah.
assistants.
Interesting. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I won't name him here, but we'll have to get him as a guest too, if he's willing. So
Yeah, he'd be a great guest for you.
yeah, he would. Yes. Um, Excellent. So now let's talk about what you're excited about. So you get a unique opportunity to kind of see a slice of the industry because you work so many, you speak. Um, what are you excited about for the industry in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Like, what do you see as trends? What do you see things as you're personally excited about? And for the industry, what are you excited about?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first thing that comes to mind has to be AI. I mean, gosh, there's so many applications, and the more I talk to colleagues, well, gosh, like you, Ankit, who are on the cutting edge of technology, the more applications I see that my mind didn't even think of as an opportunity. So I think that there's a tremendous opportunity for us to become more efficient, maybe be able to have less of a team, and still being high performing and uh, deliver a great service to our patients, but also to be less numerous. And so that way we can help with payroll expenses and pay our existing team members individually more. Another aspect that I'm really excited about is the dry eye and aesthetics world because, personally, it's hard for I believe it's hard for our industry to continue to see our reimbursements drop. And I know I've heard that like VSP is opening their own brick and mortar stores and,
Oh,
looking at buying.
Vision Works wasn't enough for them. They want
Yeah,
the branded ones, I guess.
yeah, I think that they're going to continue to do that, and vertical
Interesting. Yeah.
integration is a reality. And so, as small business owners, we really need to think outside the bun here and look for ways to differentiate ourselves. So, especially contacts, VT, dry eye, and aesthetics all come to mind. And I'm excited about the last two I mentioned in my practice because we're really passionate about those aspects. But I do think that our opticals need to be differentiated. I think that we need to not be carrying the same thing that they can get very easily at some of the commercial outfits or online. And like these frames that I have on now, they're a company called UDM, Unique Design Milan, and to my knowledge, you can't really find them except for in our practice. And of course, I'm sure you can find anything if you look hard enough online. But to differentiate so that they look at our opticals differently than they would other places, and to offer services that maybe not be covered by these insurance plans that allow us to be more profitable with the same amount of time. I think that those things are what I'm really excited about. I think that there's a ton of opportunity, and I hear a lot of, oh, this, private equity or, online eye exams and all this stuff. But I just feel like there's just such a need for great eye care, but we have to be different than the other options available out there in the community.
Yeah, that's a constant theme I hear on the podcast is expanding scope and practice to the full scope that your state allows. And some states allow a lot. So some folks are, they're doing like laser treatments and I was like, wow, okay. Yeah, but then, they're like the only optometrist or doctor within 200 miles or something. So I wish we had that opportunity here in Georgia, but it's a little more restricted here. But it's interesting because you're right about the niches. Actually, he's a future guest. He's coming on later. I was talking to him and he was saying they started an after hours model for optometrist specific need. I was like, that's brilliant. And so I'm excited to talk to him about that. But there's so many creative ways that, hey, we can expand the scope of optometry. And it's interesting because I want to touch on one thing and get your thoughts on this. We've learned that there's different personas that like different things. And even inside like vision therapy, there's individual personas. So you've got the mom who's a like big, heavy researcher. And then there's other folks who may be more impulse, like, oh, you know what? I just heard about this. We got to go. And so even with our shoppers, like for our retail side, sometimes it's a fashion oriented client. Sometimes it's a budget conscious person. And so understanding who we are relative to who we serve has been important for us. How do you see that balance out? Because you're like you said, your office is a little bit more. I'd classify it closer to the higher end model. It's not like super high end where you have like like extremely high end like you see in some of the cities, but it's pretty up there, especially for your area. Talk to us about your personas, your target. How do you think through that? How do you see offices work through that? Do you see people trying to be everything to everyone, or is it better like, hey, you kind of know who you are, and talk about how you do that and how you see other people do that.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first thing that I think of when I think about who we want to market to is our target market list. And this is a concept. I know you run EOS with Traction in your office as well. And we started running Traction in 2019 and it's been transformational for us. And if you're not aware of what I'm talking about, it's a book written by Gino Wickman. I encourage you to read it. It's one of the things that we help practices implement with Sherpa. But either way, our target market is 30 to 75-year-old females that live within 35 miles of our practice, that are health driven, style conscious, that appreciate a high level experience. And so that is whenever we go to market our practice, who we focus on. And if we ever step out of those guidelines, I'll remind because I have a marketing lead now, someone that's devoted on my practice to marketing our practice in the community. And sometimes every once in a while I'll have to remind, hey, listen, what is our target market list? And she'll be, all right, Dr. Golson, and she'll recite the thing that I just said. And I said, all right, so this particular this particular thing that, that you went to, is this in our target market? And she's like, well, no, not exactly, but blah, 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 blah. And so I have to kind of remind her, this is really what we're after. And I think it's really important that we know who we market to and what niche in our communities that we fill. I think that's wildly important. And we can't be everything to everybody, nor should we try. And there's really three areas that we can compete, and it's service, and it's price, and it's quality. Pick your favorite two. And so in my practice, we decided not to compete on price because it's really hard to compete with the Walmarts and the, Vision Marts and all the other, Zenny opticals that people buy from. So we compete on quality and service, and those are the two areas that we focus our hard work on. And so, yeah, knowing who we serve, knowing who we market to, and we will serve anybody cradle to grave. I mean, it's not just that we only see those patients in our practice, but if we're going to go to the efforts of marketing and we're going to, go out into the community at these different events and hang our banner and say, hey, we're Envision Eyecare. Those are the events that we look for. And it's really, in my opinion, a mistake to try and be everything to everybody and just, try and do like a shotgun approach, because there's just too much competition out there for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tougher too. I was doing an industry study. It's interesting. Optometry is a really unique business because it's really like two or three businesses in one. If you look at just the services side, it's pretty fragmented. There's not like a dominant player necessarily, right? Like no one really has more. Like I think my eye doctor, at least at the time, I was the biggest player, around 20% market share. But if you look at the retail side, that's like, okay, Luxottica own like the majority, right? They're the big behemoth. It's consolidated. It's a pretty mature industry. So it's almost like, hey, where do you want to play and how do you want to play? And where can you make the biggest impact? So if I look at that, I want to play on the fragmented side where I have more leverage and control, even though I'm not a doctor, but I want my doctors to practice the full scope. Let's do some dry eye. Let's do myopia control. Let's take a look at treating glaucoma, whatever you feel comfortable with treating. Let's treat that here because that side is so fragmented. Retail, yes, we have to find where we can be competitive with the big boys because it's not going to be build and they will come. It's a competitive market there, which is super interesting because I think that's been a helpful philosophy for us. And similar to what you said, can't be everything to everyone. It's hard.
Well, I really appreciate our conversations in the past about this, because you do have such a wide berth of knowledge in different industries, and you can see things. You might not be an optometrist, but you've had experience in these other industries, and you can apply that to eye care. And so, when you speak up, when we've been in our different mastermind groups and different conversations we've had, when you speak up about this type of things like that, I really start to listen because, really and truly, and I'm not just trying to like flatter you or blow smoke, but I feel like when I speak about surrounding yourselves with people who are more experienced or have, are smarter than I am, you're one of those people, Ankit, because you do have that, just kind of all these different experiences and knowledge in different industries that you apply to eye care, which is really cool.
I appreciate it, Larry. Checks in the mail.
Oh, perfect.
Hey, so I want to shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about you personally. You have a really unique approach to the business. What made Larry Larry? Like, give us a story about a formative moment for you. Could have been when you were younger, could have been a few years ago, but something that really impacted you to say, like, this is why I am who I am today.
Well, let's see. That's a great question. There's been a host of them. And I think that for me, I guess I could tell the story of how I ended up becoming an optometrist. And, the Cliff Note version of that is I entered the University of Georgia as a business major, and I was taking my first kind of like conversation with the consultant that tells you what classes to take to fulfill your major. And as they were looking up something on their computer, I turned and I saw someone walking in the business school with a suit and tie on. And I just had all this vision. My dad's a financial advisor. I had a vision of him walking every morning into breakfast wearing a tie and wearing a suit every day. And I was like, I don't want to wear a suit coat every day. So I actually, just because of that one image, switched my major to biology, and I was going to be a veterinarian. And I loved animals. I loved science. I was like, all right, well, this could work too. And I worked for a few veterinarians, one in Atlanta, one in Athens, Georgia, and both were actually pretty miserable. And Veterinarians, I have tremendous respect for. Seems like a very hard field to be in for lots of reasons. But I also realized it wasn't for me. And so I started looking at other medical disciplines, and I started looking pretty hard at optometry and chiropractic, and chose optometry. And it was a formative moment because I remember being in a optics physics class in college, and I had this really sweet, he was a short Japanese professor, and he just loved optics. And I don't know if you've ever studied optics, Ankit, but it is not the most exciting subject. But this guy, for whatever reason, he was just like bananas about it. And I caught some of that excitement. It was contagious. And so I ended up applying to optometry school. And the most formative moment was when I went down to Costa Rica with my Savage group, and that stands for Student Volunteers of Optometric Service to Humanity. And we'd raise money throughout the year to buy flights, and we would go down to a third world country. And back then, I guess Costa Rica was considered more of a third world country than it is now. But at any rate, we would give eye exams and eyewear to some of the impoverished communities. And that I went through my entire first year of optometry school studying pretty basic science, still not knowing if optometry was right, even after a year of optometry school. But when I went down to Costa Rica and I had my first interaction with real people in that setting of patient-doctor relationship, I loved it. And I was like, this is awesome. You get to help people see. You get to help them. Like, it's almost like instant gratification to go from like not seeing to seeing. And also it's an area of fashion. So you get to help people feel better about the way they are seen. And it's also really cool, dorky science stuff, which I love. So I would say that what made me into an optometrist was a series of events. But that I remember that moment in Costa Rica being a aha moment, like, this is it. I've arrived. This is what I want to do in my life.
Nice. That's really cool. I really like that story. I think there's been a couple other people I've talked to that have had similar, like, oh wow, this is it for me, because they've helped someone to do a mission trip or something like that. Appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. I didn't realize that. I didn't know that about you.
Sure.
So let's back it up. So you hinted at optometry school a little bit. And by the way, I won't hold it against you that you went to Georgia. I went to Georgia Tech, but it's okay.
Oh man, we'll have to talk about that after the show.
Well, for those of you who don't know, it's a rivalry, but I don't really count it one because we haven't won anything in years. So it's not really a rivalry when the other person doesn't think you're a rival. But regardless, I'm curious, what advice would you give to your younger self coming right out of optometry school, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, knowing what I know now is the advice I would give is like, take your time figuring out what you really want to do with your career, because I was fortunate in the idea that I got to work for a lot of different practice modalities to kind of understand the good, the bad, and the ugly with our field. I worked for ophthalmology, I worked for commercial, I worked for other doctors, I worked for independent opticals, and I really got to see, the soup to nuts of our field in that way. And, I would say that getting out of school, I think for younger ODs now, they come out of school oftentimes with crushing debt. And I think that's really hard. We're fortunate to be in optometry where we can't repay that debt. I know a lot of students come out of college and post-college studies with degrees that they can't really afford to pay their student loans back. So we are fortunate in that sense. But also, to find the balance of what type of practice do I want and what feels right. And sometimes you just got to work in different places to get that rite of passage to know. And then I would say to people who are thinking about practice ownership, to really make sure that you want to do practice ownership. Because if you're, I'm talking to optometrists, they're like, maybe I want to start a practice, I'm not really sure. And I usually advise those people not to start a practice, because it really is. And as you know, running practices yourself, Ankit, it's a labor of love. I mean, there's great days and there's great, opportunity with it and flexibility in some cases, but it's also very easy to become a slave to it. And I remember working 70, 80 hours a week for the first year or two of opening my practice from a cold start. And I would never do that again. I mean, I would never choose that again. I was, in my early 30s, and it was fine at the time, and I'm glad I did it. And also part of my motivation for wanting to delegate pretty much everything in the practice to other people is to create freedom. And I think that it's it's maybe a misnomer that, you own your own business and therefore you get to be your own boss, you get to be free, because it can easily go the other direction. And so I like to, have a conversation about that with people when we're thinking about it.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I like that insight. And if people want more insights and they want to reach out to you, where can people find you?
Yeah, sure. Well, my email is drg@sherpaconsults.com, and they can message me there. If they want to learn more about my practice, Envision Eyecare, it's myenvisioneyecare.com. And so they can find more about our practice in Asheville if they go to that website. But either way, feel free to reach out to me, because I love to help, and I really enjoy talking to optometrists across the country. And I have a client in Canada as well, and it's really cool to see the differences between the two countries. But yeah, I think that, in my personal opinion, private practice is the best way to deliver care, and it's the best way as a patient to receive care that's available. And so I really want to see us thrive as small businesses and small practices, and be able to be relevant for years to come.
That's awesome. Well, and we'll put those in the show notes for folks so they can reach out to you.
Awesome.
Thank you again, Dr. Golson, for being on the show.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, audience, for listening. If you learned something today or laughed, tell someone about the podcast and YouTube channel. And thank you again, Larry. This has been another exciting episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Let's see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.